What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to DoloresCannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS.
The author of the sensational international bestseller and the most compelling non-fiction publication of all time is back in London for the first time in 25 years to celebrate Chariots of the Gods' 50th anniversary. Eric Von Däniken Legacy Night. In this 2-hour special, you are invited to share with Eric his most influential discoveries and revelations. Learn about his incredible life journey as an author and researcher. Meet the team behind the highly anticipated Chariots of the Gods 360-degree entertainment franchise. Eric Von Däniken Legacy Night, live streamed from the Princess Anne Theatre, BAFTA 195, Piccadilly, London, October 15th, 2016.
The comments and views expressed on The Moore Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The Moore Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online. You're now watching the UK's only alternative late night talk show, and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm joined with Mike Clelland, who began his study of the UFO abduction phenomena in 2006 as a way to better understand his own personal experiences. The act of looking unleashed a flood of synchronicities as well as an intense owl sightings. Now, these events have been the focus of his ongoing research. Both owls and profound synchronicities seem to play a guiding role in the direct experiences of some abductees. This connection points to a deeper reality at play in these mysteries. By looking at these elusive and often ignored aspects of the abduction lore, something truly mystical seems to be revealing itself. And Mike Clelland, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Mike, it's fantastic to have you on. What a fascinating book that you've done. We're just putting it on the screen now. The Messages, Owls, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee. Did you ever imagine writing a book like this?
Well, I mean, I actually, initially I did an online essay. I mean, the book itself, the narrative of my own story starts in 2006, which is exactly a decade ago. Would have been October of 2006. It's just shy of a decade by a few months. And at the time, no way. So when I started seeing the owls was right around then. And then I saw them in a way that was, how to say this, like I saw so many owls that it was synchronistically
Yes.
improbable, and it sort of set me off on this journey of asking these questions. And initially it was just, asking questions about owl totems and owl mythology and stuff. And then somewhere in there in 2009, I started a blog, and then that's where I started writing about it. So it wasn't in book format, certainly at the beginning, but that changed in 2013, where I wrote a long format essay, and I got so much response from that essay, and multiple people said this has to be a full book. And I knew it when I kind of finished the essay. I realized I had amassed far more information than could be put into the magazine article, basically.
Yeah, no, it really is. I love the book cover. I love.
Oh, thank you. I'm an art director too, so that was my own. That was all me. So I was kind of took a great pride in made a UFO book without a UFO on the cover.
That's what I liked about it. I think it was, this whole thing about the owl. It's so fascinating. You see it in movies. You hear about other UFO researchers discussing such topics, and for someone to have brought it under, in this well-researched book, it's really fascinating. Thank you for the contribution that you've made. Really. But there's always a beginning start to all these stories, I think, and we've got so much to talk about in 51 minutes, and I really appreciate, like I say, having you on. Let's go to age 12 in 1974, and the first experience that you talk about as well.
Well, there's two experiences that take place in 1974. I saw a coffee can shaped object out a window. I was with my friend. At the time, we both drew it right afterwards. But what it looked like, it's not really that. I'm going to use a coffee cup, which has got owls on it. Actually, this is my coffee cup. I don't want to tip it too much, but it was tipped at a little angle, and it was descending very, very evenly. It was rotating. I'm not going to do that with the cup right now, but it was rotating. And it reminded me of, and I have sent this recently, which it didn't match anything I'd ever seen before. It didn't match a helicopter. And it even didn't match visually. Do you know the sensation? I'm old enough to know, but when I'd grown up on cartoons, right? And that was the old stop frame cell animation, where it's one illustration, change the frame, next illustration. And I remember the first time I saw computer generated animation, and it had a completely different look. It didn't match the other kind of animation. It had that sense to it. It was a completely different look, vibe, feel over anything I'd ever seen before, and we both recognize that.
That's really strange the way you're describing that. That's almost
does that make sense to you?
It does, but it's almost like nothing that we have a reference to, really. The way that you.
That's a good way of putting it. I mean, just immediately it was the sense was, oh, this is something I have no context for, and it was quite clear. It was fairly close. Was it the size? My sense it was bigger than a Volkswagen, but smaller than a school bus. So somewhere in that middle ground. Lasted for just a few moments, disappeared, gone. The other event you're talking about happened. There was a high school football game. I was 12 years old in 1974, right. And if you go from the high school, I wasn't in the high school at the time, but that's what the kids did on Friday night. So you walk from the high school football game to my house. It was a short walk. I was right in the neighborhood. And I wanted to be home in time to see a television show that started at 10 o'clock. So I was walking along. I got to a point in the sidewalk. I was with a friend. Got to this point in the sidewalk. Right now, I could go back with a piece of chalk and put an X right on that spot where I stood. There was a flash in the sky. It felt like God took a light switch and just flipped on the sky orange and then flipped it back off. It was just orange and then back to normal, lasting probably less than a second. Very jarring. Complete sky illuminated orange. And I remember at the moment even saying to him, wow, was that a meteorite? Was that lightning? Was that something in the background, like an explosion? And it was silent. None of our speculation made any sense. But I remember right at the time, we were doing what amounted to kind of logical deduction. No, it's not this, it's not that. And so I got home, and my parents were angry at me. And I was, what are you angry at me for? I'm home at 9:30 and time to see the show at 10. They're like, no, it's 11:30. The 11 o'clock news was just ending. And I this was way before like Bud Hopkins and Missing Time and stuff like that. So I never saw the show. The show, incidentally, was a paranormal show called Kolchak the Night Stalker. I don't know if you ever that made. It's on Netflix. It's worth watching. It's a little bit of a period piece from the early '70s, but it's the television show that Chris Carter based the X-Files on.
Right. I got you. Now, so you was in trouble for being late. No idea that this had even taken place.
The next Monday morning, the friend, I said, something weird happened on Friday night. And we were with some other folks and some of their kids, and he said, yeah, we saw a UFO with lights and everything. And I immediately clammed up because I never saw a UFO. I just saw the sky turn orange, and I have never brought it up to him since. And it just felt like he was lying in a way. I don't know if that it could, just because it simply didn't match my memory.
When did you get to remember this event then? Was this in 2006 or?
Oh, no, that memory was always there.
It was always there, right, right.
So, that memory was always in place. And, I could tell that story, and I did often, and I would just tell it, and then when I started reading UFO books, which would have been about 1992, I always had that in the background, like that this really feels like, the Missing Time is pretty telling.
Yes.
And I managed to just deny it and push it away and not believe it or trust it or trust myself.
What about the friends that you was with? One on the sleepover and of course the friends in the daytime. So they both saw different things, but the friend in the sleepover saw the same rotating object.
Yes, we both drew it. Yeah. So
where are those drawings?
They're on my blog. So I have them. Actually, I don't have my friend's drawing, but I certainly have mine. So
you kept.
This is nearly well over 40 years ago, 42 years ago now. So
have you redrawn it?
I have. I've done a drawing that's in the book. I I colored it in and toned it with Photoshop and stuff like that. So it's much cleaner reference now than was in the as a boy. So
that's incredible.
My skills have improved in the last 40 years. So.
Absolutely. And okay, your website. Let's get this because that's important just to give that out, I think.
Okay, it's a blog, so that it's hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. So just Hidden Experience. If you type in Hidden Experience Owls, if you type in my name Owls, it'll come right up.
Okay. So we're putting that on the screen as well, and along with your book. Interesting, very very fascinating. Now. Yeah, I think we should really just move to the next biggest event, which is when I think you turned 30 years old.
Oh, this is so this has nothing to do with owls still, yeah. But so 30 years old, I was I was living in Maine, upstate in Maine, a very rural area, and woke up in the middle of the night. I was living alone, and there was a bright light shining in the bedroom window. I sat up on my elbow and looked out the window, and this is like, I should have freaked out, and I didn't. There were 5 of this classic spindly gray aliens right outside my window, like close. And they were walking. I have since done a drawing of it, and I drew them as if they were just standing there. But they were actually walking. And that lasted and they were backlit by this bright white light. And the white, it would have been perfect, right, if it was a landed flying saucer back there. It's not what it was. The bright light was just, it didn't look like anything any bigger than a washing machine or something. So rather small bright light. They were obviously walking towards the house. I was the only one in the house. I should have freaked out. I should have locked the doors and, nailed the doors shut or something. What I did is there was a voice in my head, and the voice very calmly said, "Oh yes, they're back. Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down." And that's exactly what I did. I just put my head on the pillow and went right to sleep. And the sighting lasted maybe 30 seconds, maybe 20 seconds. And I never, the next morning I dismissed it as nothing more than a vivid dream. And I never even bothered to go out and look and see if there were footprints in the snow.
Do you find yourself drawn to want to get regression on such events, or do you find...
I've tried that. I've actually gone through regression a few times. I've attempted it. Nothing's come up. Honestly, this is going back a few years. I was so tense about the subject. It was just tied in knots. And I talk about that in the book. Like it was not an easy chapter of my life. Honestly, since writing the book was very cathartic. I feel like I'm much calmer now. I really feel that. and much more at peace with the mystery. I have no answers, but I'm much more at peace with the mystery. So I've attempted it. Nothing came up. A few events, like trying to like I worked with Bud Hopkins, who you're obviously familiar with,
of course,
and Leo Sprinkle and Barbara Lamb. They've all attempted hypnosis on me, and then nothing really came up. The only thing that, like, I basically retold the story I told you about the event from 1993 in Maine, and the only thing that came up, which I think I remembered at the time, but it was just too like it was almost felt like impolite to even bring that up. But under hypnosis, I was relaxed enough. The only thing that came up was that I just retold the same memory just as I told it to you, but there was that sensation of, oh, it's them, they're back, was very palpable in the regression, and that's as much as I've really gotten out of anything.
Yeah, now that's interesting. That is. I'm trying not to put words in your mouth here, but would you say that you're quite blocked from?
Oh yeah, quite
Right.
blocked. Yeah, in fact,
Okay.
I mean that, and I just decided not to push it. I mean, even Bud Hopkins, like the last I saw him, and he, I left his house, and he was a super gracious guy, and really, he'd obviously done this a lot and had really good people skills and such. But when I walked out of his house, and he tried so many little tricks to get me to remember events, and especially the one on the sidewalk in 1974 with the missing time. He was like, okay, he tried, trick after trick, and I mean not trick, but ways to frame the thing. And I was like, nope, I can't get past it. I'm there on the sidewalk, I can't get past it. And when I left, he gave me a big hug and slapped me on the back and said, I've met some people who are blocked, and you are blocked. So, which is a little bit leading, perhaps, but I felt I respected his honesty in saying that to me. So.
Well, that's incredible. So yeah, he said that. Wow. Okay. Obviously, we've been working with Dolores Cannon's company quite a bit, in various different things, and I'm sure she spoke about them.
She spoke about owls. It's in the book. Yeah, she had Dolores Cannon had an event, and I met Dolores very briefly a couple times at conferences.
Excellent.
She, in one of her books, The Custodians, I think, tells of drive. It's interesting. So this would have turned the clock back. I could look it up in the book, but I think it was the 80s, the late 80s. She had been doing paranormal research and hypnotherapy, but never blended the two together, really. And then suddenly in her work, she realized, like, oh, now I got to start looking into this UFO thing. And she was actually coming back from a meeting where she had decided to press forward with more of the UFO research. So she's driving home, and there's a great big tall owl in the road, 4-foot tall owl. And she talks about pulling right up to the owl, and then the owl being taller than the hood of her car. So she's driving at night in Arkansas. Owl's taller than the hood of her car. So she pulls right up, and the head of the owl's looking at her over the hood, which there's no owl that can do that. Even a small car, the owl's going to be way hidden under the hood. And the owl lifts up and flies down the road and lands. She drives up and does it again. Owl lifts up, flies down the road and lands, and it does it again. So it did it all the way to her driveway, and then she pulled into the driveway. She later was at the British Natural History Museum somewhere in London, and I think that's right. I'm not sure the name of the museum, but there was a big room where they had all these owls, these stuffed owls, and they were all behind glass, and they had every owl in the world was basically behind this glass. And she walked and looked at them, and she realized, like, this owl that I saw does not match anything even close to what these owls are. What I saw was far, far too big. So even in that moment, she was like, I realized what I saw simply couldn't exist. So what I saw doesn't match, wasn't an owl.
That's very interesting.
And then I've heard that in one form or another over and over and over again about people seeing owls on roads, tall owls, improbably tall owls.
Yes, absolutely. And did you have that experience as well?
I have never had that experience. I've seen a lot of owls. I've seen a lot of owls, more than I should, in a way. Like there was a point when between about 2006 and 2010 where it was like off the charts, where I just felt like I was seeing them all the time. But I've never seen what people call the screen memory aspect. The implication is that this owl is something other than a real owl. It is some sort of psychic projection put into the mind of the observer, oftentimes an abductee, and it's put there, in essence, to mask an event or mask the appearance of the of what would be just an alien. So you're not seeing what would be very jarring sight of an alien. Instead, you're seeing what would you could dismiss as something rather normal, as an owl.
Yeah.
The why, this gets problematic in some of these, because how does it fly down the road, and how does it? There's a lot of these sightings where 4-foot owl will fly.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, there's so many ways to take this as well. Okay, so when did you first have your an owl sighting that you really thought was really not of the norm, and more you could now fit into, potentially where we are right now with the UFO phenomena as well?
I was camping. This is actually a bit of a long story. I'll make it pretty quick. I was camping with a friend. Her name is Kristen. We were camping in Grand Teton National Park for one night. I lived very close to the park for a long time, and it was very normal for me just to go out for one night. So we went without shelters, right? So it was calm, beautiful afternoon. We left the house, and so you could just sleep out under the stars. So as the sun was setting, we saw owls. 1, 2, then 3 owls. They were flying above us. They were flying around us. When we laid down on our backs under the sky, this is up in the high elevation in the Northern Rockies, the spectacular stars, and the stars would be, you're laying down, and the owls would fly right above your face. They're very quiet, so it's silent. They block the stars for just one moment. It was really extraordinary. We were both kind of freaked out. 4 days later, we went camping again, totally different part of the mountains. Same thing happens. 3 owls surrounded us as the sun was setting, flew over us, landed on branches near us. This second time, they were much closer. They came much closer to us. And then it blew my mind. It was so strange. And now, this is something I thought about in the moment. So that would have been 2006, 10 years ago. I thought about this in the moment. I didn't say it, because I had been reading UFO books and stuff like that. So I was very immersed. At that point, I was very immersed in the subject through book knowledge. And I thought to myself, there's literally a voice in my head, booming voice that said, this has something to do with UFOs. These owls have something to do with UFOs. And I was like, how do you say that at the time? Now I can. But that set me off on the research. So at that point, the stories I told earlier, those were kind of boiling, simmering, and the steam was building, and there was going to be a point when I had to look into this stuff, into my own stuff, and I was just putting it off and denying it, and it was this owl sighting that really made me look into it. So from that point on, whenever I spoke to anyone who had these types of experiences or a researcher, I asked a lot of questions, and one of the questions I would ask was, do you have any experiences with owls? Unusual experiences, and it wasn't 100%. But it was enough that there's a pattern, and I started hearing the weirdest stories. And I started archiving them and writing them down and cataloging them, and it was, started from my own direct experience. That was the inspiration. But I was shocked. It felt like there was this, this aspect of the, like the owl thing. You open a UFO book, right? And there might be a paragraph about owls. Couple paragraphs, and they show up, and I made a big effort to search those out, and I have to thank readers. If you have a blog, people are really good. Oh, there's one paragraph in this book here, or there's one article here online. So but it's a tiny part of the overall thing. And what I found is this little fractal, right? This little outlying, almost insignificant and easily dismissed aspect of this bigger phenomena is a bottomless pit. It's like that one. I figured I'll research this for a little while and write a little essay, and then I'll be done with it. And that wasn't what happened. It was the wealth of amazing stories just boggled my mind.
Yeah, that's incredible, isn't it? I know. I can only imagine a little bit of what your journey has been, because I suppose when you've had your experiences that you've had, and some people will be jumping up and down saying, oh gosh, I'd love to have the experience that he's had, and to get to really have that first-hand contact, if that is what we're talking about here, which it seems to be. Yet for yourself, you've got even for all these happenings, there's no reference for it. What do you do with it?
Well, I mean, there's reference for it if I was like living in a jungle village in Borneo or something like that. I could talk to the local shaman, and it would be normal, to have an interaction with a magical animal spirit.
Right.
Unfortunately, I don't live there. I live in this world of TV shows and scientists and stuff like that. So I live in this material Western world where there is no reference of it. There's fictional reference, there's fantasy reference, there's mythology that references it, but there's a delineation. Those are on the other side of what we call the real world. And so what happens is your definition of reality crumbles. You recognize like, oh, I'm confronted with something that everything in the world tells me is not true. And then I think that everyone who has these experiences goes through this process where, your normal reality crumbles, and then you have to do the hard work to rebuild it somehow. And that was me reading philosophy books and mythology books and talking to people and stuff. So,
yeah.
Keep going. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
Well, yeah, I think so anyway, so it was very difficult, and everyone recognizes that there's a sort of a dark night of the soul when you come to terms with this stuff, if your own experiences.
Oh yes, definitely the dark night of the soul, and I'm so glad it's been a process for you where it's helped you put you at ease as well with going through this process of writing this book. Yeah, there was something interesting you said earlier on when under regression as well. I think you said this where it's very important what they were doing. That was one of the messages that came through. It's very important what these, as we call them, this phenomena is doing, what these aliens are doing, what these visitors.
Well, that came from I think that quote. Did I say that in this? I don't think I said it just now, did I? Or
well, maybe you didn't. Maybe it's on my notes, but I thought you might have done. Sorry, yeah.
I did say it, and that was a regression that took place where that was nothing to do with UFOs. That was like a past life regression. So that was just like I did that.
Right.
But I did. The regressionist did say like, "Oh, is there anyone else in the room?" And I'm like, "Yes, my alien spirit guide is here." And it was kind of mystical, and I didn't get any visuals. And she said, she asked. This was in London. Her name is Lorraine Flaherty. She's amazing researcher or therapist. And she said, "And why are they here?" And I said, "Because it's important." And I just kind of repeated that in some way or another, like, so what is your involvement? I don't know, but what are you here for? I don't know, but it's important. So that's very open-ended and very whatever. It's very elusive, but that's my sense that this stuff is. It wouldn't be appearing, it wouldn't be manifesting unless there was a reason. And my sense is this reason is a sort of metaphysical wake-up call. Like I speculate that the owls are playing the role. I speculate a bunch. I don't have any answers, but I do sort of dance around the speculation that the owls are an alarm clock, and they are here to wake us up. And the title of the book is The Messengers, and oftentimes people will be wrestling with existential issue, oftentimes a death in the family, and an owl will show up, and they'll treat the owl as the messenger. So the owls show up other times rather than just around UFO sightings. They show up at highly charged moments in people's lives.
Yes, which I'm guessing that was a bit of a surprise to you as well when looking into this, but when writing this book as well.
Well, it's right in the literature. I mean, you can find it. People talk about owls showing up at the time of death, and they actually show up a lot when people are going through a shamanic initiation. Like, so if someone's apprentice.
Well, the book does go into owl mythology, which is really interesting. I got to read most of that. I found that fascinating. Even owls in the Bible, and
I couldn't find much about owls in the Bible. I really wanted to. It seemed like more like owls in the Bible play in a way the same role they play now in a haunted house movie. Right. So, so in the Bible, they were talking about like going out into the desert, and it was dreary, and they would call the desert the place of owls. And as opposed to, it didn't bolster my research. It was more just that owls, and I think this is typical of any night animal in an era before the electric light. The night was associated with something sinister and frightening, and with, car headlights and lights and things like that. It's lost much of that aura present day. So there's animals like the owl that have a kind of sinister, foreboding lineage in history, and I think that just traces back to before we could turn a light on at night.
I mean, it's really confusing, isn't it, as to the aspect of why abductees, and even yourself, have had the experience of the owls. Why an owl of all creatures would something appear to be that it's not?
Well, I think that many of these owl sightings are real owls. And then the question arises, why are these real owls arriving in the lives of experiencers? I mean, I got one story after another where, someone who's going through the UFO abductee, lifetime of experiences. They're going through a chapter of what amounts to high activity in their life. They feel like there's visitations happening over and over again. And this is what happens when you talk to these folks. And they get up and they walk out of the house in the morning. There's an owl on a branch. And they go to work and they come back and the owl's still on the branch. And they get up the next morning and the owl's watching them. So and that goes on for that duration of high activity. Now that shows up. Now how do you make sense of that? What is the owl doing there? Why is its presence? Why is its association? What's the owl's association with these highly charged moments? Okay,
so this could be the owl with its night vision that we really don't know quite what it sees. We have as far as our understanding of it is, and the research is that it's night vision, and maybe
very skilled, as good as any animal on Earth.
Yeah, and that with this night vision, maybe it's able to see portal dimensional openings that we have no idea even exist. I mean, there is the talk and the theory in the UFO community now that these are interdimensional. A lot of this UFO activity, not what we first perceived it to be even. And if these animals are able to, witness these openings, and maybe they're at these highly charged places where these UFO happenings are taking place, it's very attractive for them to be near there. But
that avenue of speculation is very fruitful.
Yeah.
There's other accounts that it doesn't. Then it gets even weirder.
Yep.
So yes.
Well, that's it. Well, then that would not. Yeah. Where there are other accounts, it would not comprehend that understanding. It's just it is just still weird. Why though? Still that a Grey would want to be seen as that as something it's not. But then again, is that purely because it's the way of putting a shield in place or hiding behind
it's a
something?
way of its camouflage,
or
sure.
Camouflage,
and or a masquerade. Let's say disguise would be a better word than camouflage.
Probably disguise.
And then, but it's not just owls. Other animals appear. Deer and raccoons and cats appear often. And people will say, like, I walked into my kitchen and I saw, a 6-foot tall cat. So I've heard those stories too. And Jesus, curiously enough, appears. So I mean, that like people will say like, oh, there I woke up in the middle of the night and Jesus was in my bedroom, and so there's it's not just the owl, but I would say that far and away, the owl is the one that is most often reported.
Yeah, and some of the films that obviously mainstream Hollywood has shown that they appear in as well. We spoke about this just off air, the Fourth Kind, the movie. Now that movie, as you reminded me, was not based on true facts at all. Even though owls feature in the movie, it's not. It was all made up, basically.
Well, it was based on true fact in the sense that whoever wrote the script obviously had read a few UFO books. They then. I mean, it was very exploitive how they presented it, but you could see that it was based on the available UFO literature, and within that literature is owl stuff. And I'm quite certain the scriptwriters were just like, ooh, owls, they're scary, haunted house movie kind of, fodder, so we'll just let's play that up. But it was purported to be, it purported to use actual video footage, and that was just a publicity stunt. And I'm all for a good publicity stunt. So, they didn't do anything wrong. But it was, that it was a work of fiction.
I'm trying to think that there was a movie, The Mothman Prophecies, with Richard Gere. Did owls feature in that? I don't think.
I just watched it recently, and I don't think there were any owls.
No, there wasn't.
I don't think there were any owls. Right. There's a few movies where owl hooting shows up at an appropriate time.
Okay.
And there was a made-for-TV movie based on Bud Hopkins' book Intruders, and just before and this is played up a little bit, haunted house movie kind of thing. It was cameras moving in the house at night, and crickets are chirping, and there's a hooting owl, and then the abduction takes place, and I'm like, oh my God, that's perfect. That's just what I'm getting in my reports, and I actually talked to the filmmaker. Well, I had Robbie Graham forwarded a message to Tracy Torme, scriptwriter, and he got it back to me that, he basically asked, were those owls put there on purpose? And he was like, no, I don't know, like, no, we didn't think anything about stuff like that. So.
Absolutely. And, okay. Oh, there was another film that you mentioned in your book as well, the Travis Walton case.
There's a very brief owl sighting in that, right at the beginning. Yeah, and it's just a camera's panning across some stuffed animals in like a old Western bar. And what's interesting about that is there's an abductee, an experiencer. Her name is Niala Isley, and she saw that movie in a theater. She talked about this directly to me. We spoke about it on the phone, and it's in her autobiography, excuse me. And when that moment happened, it's right in the first 5 minutes of the film. Camera pans across, there's a bobcat and an owl. And as soon as she saw the owl, she had a flash, a spontaneous memory of having an implant put in her ear at that moment. Like, how do you these little clues and stuff like that are just so elusive. All I'm really doing is cataloging all these strange clues. And I think the stories in the book they have the sort of flavor of a campfire story. I think they're very engaging to read. And in a way, to make my point, all I could really do is just give multiple examples of these owl events.
How many people have come forward to you since releasing your book?
My God, it's mind blowing. I mean, there's no way I can answer that. I mean, what I do is I get up in the morning and I open my email. It's not every day. That would be an exaggeration, but it is almost every day. I open my email and there's an amazing owl story in the that just like, hi Mike, my name is Joe Schmo, and I have never told this story to anyone, and here's my experience. And I'm getting this. I cannot keep up with it. And I mean, and then people, and I also make an effort to go to conferences, and people come right up to me and say, "Oh, here, listen to this story." And it's these stories, there's really no one-offs in the book. Like any story that makes it in the book has got usually many other examples of the same kind of account. So there's a few that are standalone, and I note those in the book. But if you read a story in that book, I've got a backlog within my archives of very similar accounts.
And you mentioned just previously as well that owls based around death as well, or based around what would you call it? I suppose highly charged moments.
Yeah. And meditation shows up around meditation. Actually shows up around mushrooms too. People taking mushrooms, which is kind of parallels the shamanic initiation in a way. If you were in a village in Mexico 100 years ago and wanted to be the shaman, you would, part of your ritual would be, eating magic mushrooms.
Yeah.
So, So, and the stuff around death is people have, I'm speculating now, like the owl as a totem, as a symbol, as a symbolic entity would be, for me, after completing the book, what I see the owl as is a symbolic of the transformational process, like a strong transformational process. And the ultimate transformation is death, right? You go from living to dead, and then there's something, I'm convinced there's something beyond.
Sure.
And also, I would say that being taken on board a UFO would be a transformational process, and I'm certain the UFO occupants know that, and that is why these owls are appearing. I mean, it's a there's MUFON is a very nuts and bolts research organization, and so if you have a UFO sighting, I'm who do you call? Do you call MUFON, and they come and measure the burn mark in the yard, and then they ask you questions about what time it was, and which direction in the sky did you see it? Or do you call the medicine man from the local Indian reservation? And do they come and say, what was happening to your soul leading up to this event? What's going on with your belief system afterwards? These questions are, to me, much more important than the shape of the object in the sky.
And what about those cases, and maybe you've experienced this as well, where you've called out to have an experience or see an unidentified flying object, and what people see initially is an owl or owls?
Well, there's a couple of examples in the book which I find very telling, where people went on hikes and they were driving to go to the hike, And these are both experiencers. Both people have had some very odd, unusual experiences in their lives. And as they're driving, they're going, oh my God, this is the day. This is the day. I know it. I know it. This is the day when I'm going to have an experience and actually meet an alien. I know it. And they go on the hike and they don't meet an alien, but they have a very powerful owl sighting. And I have two examples of this. One where a guy saw an owl in the woods and then got to the summit. It was a summit in New England, so it wasn't like he was climbing Everest or anything. So, and then from the summit, he sees a bright, shining light off in the distance, just sitting there. And then so he saw an owl in the woods and he sees what amounts to a UFO, an improbable light that doesn't match anything. And then the other story was this from a woman, and she hiking through the woods and actually has psychic telepathic communication with this owl that gets extremely trippy and strange. And I cataloged that in the book too. So.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? And there's also the cases as well of owl communication. Isn't
which
is
yeah, there's a few. Yeah, and it's most often the message is received as kind of like a symbolic message.
Yes.
Like right after a funeral is very symbolic, or at a funeral. I have a few of those, And then there's a few. There's one woman, UFO abductee, time of high experience. She was living in Phoenix at the time, which is bird symbolism right there. Phoenix is the phoenix bird, the symbol of death and resurrection. She's walking through a dull suburban parking lot in the mall, and then there's a big lamppost, and she looks up at the lamppost, full daylight, and there's a big owl on top of that lamppost, and she immediately gets telepathic communication from this owl, and the owl says, "You are not who you seem to be." And that's another one of these very sort of open-ended, cryptic, almost like a Zen koan that people are delivered. Very rarely does anyone get a very straight answer from an alien on board a craft, or it just seems like that's the kind of thing like that the Buddhist guru would tell a student.
You're not who you seem to be. Yeah, as though this is an illusion of some sort.
Your identity itself is an illusion. Exactly. Yeah.
Has this experience made you? How's it changed you in terms of spirituality?
Well, I mean, it seems like there's a lot more fruit in the fruit salad. Let me put it that way than I would have. Immediately I was raised with one thing in the fruit salad, right? It was like you didn't get a choice, So, and now it just seems like there's this that's so rich as far as what the potential that's out there, and. So the book culminates, which you haven't gotten there yet. You haven't gotten. So the book culminates. The last whatever, some sort of 20 pages or something like that, culminates with what I refer to as my confirmation experience, where I feel like, and that happened in 2013, shortly after the publication of the essay.
Well, before we get to that, because I really do want to get to that. You mentioned one of you in your chapters about channeling an owl as well.
Well, I didn't channel an owl.
No.
That's a woman. Her name is Jacqueline Smith. And if you're from the right age, it's not the Charlie's Angels from the television TV series. An actress named Jacqueline Smith. It's spelled differently. She, I called her up. She wrote a beautiful book where she channeled from animals. And then there was a great chapter on owls. And she's, and then as I'm talking to her, I'm like, are you working on another book? She has one she does animal communication. So she's like, helps people with their dogs and cats and stuff. And then she did a book where she channeled from animals. And I said, what's your third book on? She said, I'm working on my third book. And she said, what's it about? And she said, well, it's about my UFO abduction experiences, contact experiences. She doesn't like the term abduction. And I was like, well, this is which is exactly what I'm finding. So I used some excerpts from that book where she channeled the owl. That's great. It's perfect. And once again, it's open-ended. It's kind of elusive. It's hard to pin down. And then while on the phone with her, and I'm so glad I recorded this. I'm on the phone. I say, well, what's, if you see an owl, if you see that owl again, you ask it. For me, you ask it, what's going on with UFO stuff? And then she kind of started talking, and then she started talking really slow. And then she even kind of went, words, as if like words weren't enough to, and then and I knew what was happening. So she was channeling, and all of a sudden she gave me exactly the answer that I needed at that point in the research. And she spoke about the owls being an archetype. Now, this is an archetype. That's a very esoteric term, and I think philosophy majors at college graduate programs would argue over what the definition of an archetype is. But the archetype would be, in its simplest definition, which she gave me a beautiful definition. I could read it. I'm not going to look it up right now, but would be somehow all of us have a collective knowledge in our subconscious. We all share that. We have a direct knowing that's not at the forefront, but it's submerged somewhere within us, and that the owls have a deeper meaning, a deeper archetypal meaning, and that meaning would then be imparted onto the observer. Basically, the abductee sees an owl. The owl is sending a message through archetypal symbolism into the subconscious. And I was at the point where that was all of a sudden, like, it felt like it takes a whole chapter I'm trying to sum it up here in a minute or so, but it takes a whole chapter to sum that up. But it felt like every puzzle piece in my fractured, mixed up thinking suddenly just went click, and all clicked together neat and tidy when she brought up the archetype aspect.
And how does that understanding for you fit into a sort of a grey being disguised as an owl, for example?
For the screen memory, well, I mean, so the gray being, my sense is the gray being is making a choice what it's going to appear at. There's a funny story in the book where a woman has lifelong abduction experiences. She's walking on a trail as a young woman. She comes around the corner and there's a gray being standing next to the trail. And they lock eyes, full daylight. And she says the sun's shining off its big bald head. And it looks at her and she looks at her and she hears the psychic words in her head, the telepathic words going, owl, 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 owl. And the next thing she knows, it's like she sees an owl there, and the owl runs off into the woods. So my sense is they're making a choice of what archetypal being they're going to appear as. I mean, few things are. Jesus shows up as a screen memory, and that's a pretty loaded archetype right there. So, and so deer. There's a rich mythology of deer. So my answer is, on one level, my answer is I don't know, and I'm speculating that they are choosing the owl to imbue the observer with that archetypal meaning.
Yes.
That symbolic subconscious meaning.
Now that makes sense, and why that is, well, we can only speculate. Maybe there's some deep connection they've got with the owl, or I don't know. But that's very interesting. So they're able to psychically connect and to, if they've got that kind of power, it almost makes you think, well, how we're quite manipulable with them as well, aren't we?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's endless stories about people like driving, like getting up in the middle of the night, like, oh, I'm just going to drive to this lonely field, and they drive there, and then they have a missing time event, and then they come home and they go back to bed and think nothing of it, like that was normal. Yeah, there's a mind control there that's very powerful.
Very powerful, but have they destroyed us? Are they changing the outcomes of certain things? I don't know. Who knows?
Well, my sense is that they're, I mean, the people I'm talking with, the people who have these experiences, are, for the most part, there's some exceptions to this, are having these very benevolent experiences, and then these people then go on to do very compassionate, or they've been doing very compassionate work, working with animals, working at animal shelters, Reiki healing. So many of these people have Reiki healing. So like healing, like hands-off therapy, healing work. So if they are here influencing us, they're doing it in a very subtle and compassionate way. Again, I have some examples where people have very, very scary accounts, but those seem to be far outnumbered. The benevolent things are far outnumbering the scary things.
Even Travis Walton, that came on the show just a few weeks ago, did say his experience now was a benevolent experience. It was a very loving experience. He feels now, as all these years have passed, that he was electrocuted by this object. They brought him in, they healed him, and they put him back. It was not, as Paramount Pictures led it to be, Fire in the Sky. That's a movie for entertainment purposes, which is great.
Yes.
Yeah, but not what happened to Travis.
I agree. Yes, and I've met him, and he's a very soft-spoken guy, and I have the sense that he is not. Well, I think what was traumatic for him was the being thrust into the limelight, being thrust into the media circus.
His friends as well being almost arrested for his murder.
For his murder, yeah.
Yeah. With all the lie tests they had as well, and all sorts of awful things were going on at that time as well. Especially when he wasn't believed as well, and then he was very badly bullied in the years that led up to after the event occurred. Yet there are people like Dr. David Jacobs who would say that it's a very negative thing, that there's no free will involved and blah, 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 blah.
Yep, and I've met Dr. Jacobs, and he's, I consider him doing legitimate research. He's doing legitimate research. Why the negative stuff is emerging from his research is, I can't answer that, but he's framing it with that, or his research, his conclusions, let me put it, are framed with a very negative outlook, as was Bud Hopkins. And I'm not finding that. And what I'm also doing is I'm very aware that I am not looking at the big overall picture. I'm very myopic in what I'm studying. I'm taking these owl stories and focusing in on that, and then the information that comes from those, I'm archiving and such. So I'm not.
Yes.
People aren't coming to me and saying I think I may have had this experience.
To be honest
owls
with you,
first. Yeah.
I've spoken on when I interviewed Dr. David Jacobs. The majority of people I get on in this field, it is very enlightening, very positive. It's not negative. But
it's about, depending whose numbers you look at, it's about 70-30, 60-40 or something like that, somewhere in there. There's a fellow named Ray Hernandez who just did a series of. Oh yes,
I know the chap.
Yeah. Very. So read his survey conclusions. He did a set of very advanced surveys with Harvard academics, and the results are fascinating. And what just clearly springs out at you was the positive aspect of this. Though there's certainly 30% is a goodly chunk of negative.
Yeah.
So I have no easy answers to why that is.
No, and I'm not going to sit here and say it's definitely this or definitely that. That would be a bit wrong of me. But I think if I was just going to say my intuitive feeling on it would be that there may be negative and there may be positive out there in types of those visiting us. And I think I'd like to think there's more positive visiting us than there is negative. But I think if you've got a universe with free will, then obviously, it takes all sorts, doesn't it?
Yeah, and my in the summation of the book, I talk about the fact that the benevolent accounts far outnumber the negative ones within the owl research.
Well, let's move this forward to a conclusion now, and I think maybe we can include your 2013 experience in that as well.
Well, that would be, we'd have to do a full another show for me to tell that properly, because it's such a long, complex story. Okay. So what happened was, while coming home from a UFO conference, I slept out under the stars, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and this is a long, complex set of things, but I sat and looked at a round building on a hilltop, and I said, that looks just like a flying saucer, a landed flying saucer. And I thought to myself, if I feel like I was I feel like I've been immersed in this stuff, I should know, right? I should have an intuitive sense if that's a flying saucer. And I looked, I felt nothing. I felt absolutely nothing. I'm like, it's a round house. Later on, I went back to the same location. There was no round house there. I laid there for what probably was an hour looking up at this thing. Weird things were going on. There was lights in the ground. There was coyotes howling nearby. Afterwards, I had got home, and I had a psychic vision. I know of no other way to put it, a psychic flash of seeing a map with 3 dots on it. So, map of southern Utah, where the event took place, Utah in the America's West, and then there were 3 dots along a straight line. It took me a little bit of work through and those were 3 of my own personal experiences, all very telling experiences that certainly played out like UFO contact. And when those 3 events lined up on the map, I did it in olden times. I would have done it with a paper map and a pencil and a ruler to make the straight line. Present day, I did it with a computer, so I could zoom in, get 1 pixel thick. And when those 3 events lined up with a precision that was, I was a changed person. So after that, I was basically, oh, well, any doubt is now gone. And now I'm on this new chapter of my life. So that was my confirmation event. And from that, in essence, came the book. I started the book shortly thereafter.
So, thank you for sharing that. Thank you very, very much.
And there was an owl in that confirmation event, right in the middle. There were 3 dots. The middle dot had an owl associated with it.
Okay, so there was an owl there. Yeah, absolutely. I thought there might be. It's so difficult to conclude this, because I think even in the book, I mean, I got halfway through it, but I'm pretty sure before we started recording this, that it's hard to put a conclusion to all this, isn't there? But how would you summarize it?
The summarization would be that as I said earlier, the owls are an alarm clock. They're here to make us wake up. And they are a sign, they're a symbol, they're symbolic. The same way that Luke Skywalker is symbolic of the hero. The owls are symbolic of the transformational process. So in some way, the owls represent a message being delivered. A message. Owls, in the mythologies, owls can see into the darkness, right? So that they fly in the dark, they disappear into the dark, but they return. And throughout all the world's mythologies, that's the core of it. They'll return with a message. What that message might be is elusive, but what I can say is, for me personally, the message has been a call to live life at a fuller, more spiritual level, and to know that like that we are not what we seem to be. There's something much richer at play here than just these owls. For me, it was a call to look into my own experiences. So it wasn't seeing the UFOs or the missing time or seeing aliens out my window in the snow that made me look into my own experiences. It was seeing the owls in 2006 in the mountains of Wyoming. That was when I was forced to go through the very grueling and actually like paradigm-shattering self-examination of what these events might mean.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. How can people get in contact with you then if they want to discuss with you their own owl stories?
Very easy. Just go to my site, which is Hidden Experience, blogspot.com. You can just Google my name, Mike Clelland, and type in owls next to that. I'm the first thing that comes up. If you type in UFOs and owls, I'm not only the first thing that comes up on Google, I'm like the first 8 things that come up on Google. So if someone in anywhere in the world, in Finland, types in UFOs, owls, you're going to find me. You go to the blog, right there at the top, it says his contact information, has my email address. So,
well, all I'd like to say is, Mike Clelland, thank you so much for joining us today. It really has been a fascinating message. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a delight.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.co.uk, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.